Hello students and welcome to BA 131 Module 4. We are halfway there in this 8-week course. We're coming up to the second half of this course and you don't want to fall behind too much. In Module 4 we'll be talking about interpreting and translating for education. We are talking about the laws related to education and language access, what is an IEP. We'll talk about special education glossary, and then we have the homework, the class exercise, and discussion. They're mentioned here, but I want to go over them in the Canvas modules. Speaking of laws related to educational language access, that is what this is about. It's about language access. Simply put, if an English speaker would understand this information, we want to provide the same access to someone who is non-English speaker. If you keep that in mind, everything else is going to make sense. So we'll talk about that, the laws specifically for language access. We'll mention what is a limited English proficient person, LEP. This falls under the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. It's a civil right for somebody to have access to this information, and that is the website there. At the state level, you have the California ELP Assessment and Language Services Policy and Processes, and that is that website there. Relating to language access in education, this is a common question, and it is specifically in the website in the law. Must my child's school provide information to me in a language I can understand? Now, this prima facie, at first sight, may seem to involve English versus non-English, English versus Spanish. But it also has to do with the register itself. If the language is so high register that people cannot understand it, then people do not have language access per se. To answer this specific question about language itself, yes, schools must communicate information to limited English proficient parents in a language they can understand about any program, service, or activity that is called to the attention of parents who are proficient in English. This is what I was saying earlier, that if an English parent would understand this information, a Spanish speaking parent or a non-English speaking parent in general needs to be able to understand this information. And this is regarding everything, includes but not limited to information regarding registration and enrollment in school and specific school programs, grievance procedures and notices of non-discrimination, language assistance programs, parent handbooks, report cards, gifted and talented programs, student discipline policies and procedures, magnet and charter schools, special education and related services, and meetings to discuss special education, parent-teacher conferences, requests for parent permissions for students' participation in school activities, anything related to school-parent communication. From the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, may my child's school ask my child or other students or untrained school staff to translate or interpret for me? The simple answer is no. Schools must provide translation or interpretation from appropriate and competent individuals and may not rely on or ask students, siblings, friends, or untrained school staff to translate or interpret for parents. And in the olden days, this used to happen. That's why this became an issue, because they would ask students to interpret for parents, and that is just not acceptable anymore. There's an exception to this, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. That was at the federal level. Here in the state level, from the California Department of Education, you can see that from the website here, an ELP assessment and language services policy and process. This is part of the California Department of Education, the California ELP Assessment and Language Services Policy and Process. The California Department of Education is the ultimate responsible party for ensuring that all persons, including limited English proficient LEP, are provided equal access to its available services and information. We go back to this issue. We have to provide equal access to everyone. The commitment of the CDE is that all of its programs and services are accessible to its LEP customers in compliance with the Dimali Alatorre Bilingual Services Act and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And this includes, but is not limited to, providing resources which include interpreters and translated materials of information and services in the language readily understood by an individual seeking guidance or assistance from the CDE. This is not just Spanish, although in California Spanish is the primary non-English language. There are many other languages, and the California Department of Education seeks to serve all of these languages. This continues with the CDE's policy. A person has the right to interact with the CDE in a language that best ensures meaningful access to programs and services at no cost to them. And here's the exception I mentioned earlier. The CDE may request a family member or minor to interpret for the person only in an emergency situation, or to obtain non-essential information, such as identifying the language that the person speaks. And this has been an issue. I don't know personally, but I have heard of situations where the parents are from Mexico, the school staff understands Spanish, but the parents come in speaking one of the original languages of Mexico. They don't speak Spanish and they only speak Mixteco, for example. So they look Spanish speaking, they are from Mexico, but the school staff cannot understand the parents because they're not speaking Spanish, they're speaking Mixteco. So they can ask the student, in this case, who is functionally bilingual because they speak a little bit of English with the siblings or friends, etc. So they can ask the student, what language do your parents speak? So then they can, as we continue here, in the event of such occurrence, the CDE will follow up with any individual via a certified bilingual employee to find out the nature of the inquiry and then provide the necessary information. So once they ascertain that the parent is speaking Mixteco, they can get a certified bilingual employee, English Mixteco, which in most cases is going to be English Spanish Mixteco. And then through that certified bilingual employee, then they can make sure that the parent understood everything that happened, clarify any information, etc. So this is the only exception to using a family member in an emergency situation. Hey, somebody is upset or choking or has an emergency situation. They don't have time to call a certified bilingual employee in this other language. They can ask the student to interpret for the parent. And then they need to follow up, making sure that everything that happened, whatever they were asking, is resolved. And the California Department of Education is the ultimate arbiter of this in the state of California, and all complaints against a school or school district pertaining to language services should be filed directly with the school district. The CDE is very unlikely to take this complaint first. You have to go through the process. You go through the school first. Then if it's not resolved, you go to the school district. If it is not resolved, then you go to the county. And then if it's not resolved at the county level, then you go to the California Department of Education. And some tips on translations and interpreting for education. Make sure that you research your area of translations, K-12 terminology. Are you talking about financial aid terminology? Is this a special education meeting? So research that. You have an IEP. Are you interpreting for that? Look for the school district or any educational institution language materials and official glossaries. Many people have translated these ahead of time so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And some districts have their own official glossary. If that's the case, use that. You can research online for Spanish translations of the educational terminology in question. Again, you do not have to reinvent the wheel, but make sure that when you're talking about education terms, that is the area where you search. Don't just go to Google Translate because that's going to give you a general translation, which may not be the same official translation of the educational term. And in the module, we have the glossaries above Module 1 in Canvas. And we're going to look at some of those on Canvas. Here are a few resources. I'll go over them in Canvas. This is another one. What is an IEP, special education? We have some information from the SELPA Riverside County IEP manual. So you can go through that. I'll show you that in the module. The OSEP Spanish Glossary Project. This is going to help you with homework 4. And part of your assignment is going to be this. Be sure to compare the English script with the Spanish language translation that is found at the bottom of that page in Canvas. Take note of the differences in syntax from English to Spanish. Take notes of any words that are used in the OSEP Spanish Glossary for Special Education, Spanish-English terms. And then you can practice on your own and cross-check with the correction key that is at the bottom of the page. Be sure to watch for subject-verb agreement. If you're doing tú versus usted, be sure to keep that straight. Look at the way it's done and then ask yourself, how would you have done it? would you have used any other words, any other terms? And finally, to remind you that for the IEP, you have to use special education terminology. So be sure to use that glossary referenced above. We'll talk about the class exercise in the module and the discussion, and of course, check the deadlines for the assignments. And those of you who are submitting bloopers, thank you very much. And of course, we have the module video lectures that go out weekly and any other announcements that are posted. Be sure to have the notifications active from this class. All right, let's go to the Canvas page. This is the pre-published view, so yours is going to look a little bit different, but this is the sequence. The assignments are at the bottom, so you have the introduction. This is going to be the video lecture. All these are only reference materials, reading materials for you, video materials as well. I'll show you in just a moment. And the assignments are here. So we have the same assignments as every week. We have the homework, class exercise, discussion. This week you have the quiz for modules 1 through 3, and then a summary of module 4. In this introduction, Educational Interpreting in K-12 and IEPs, Special Education. This is what we are covering. And to complete this module, you have the video lecture, homework, review the documents as reference materials, and then homework, class exercise, discussion. And of course, the PowerPoint is here, where you can download it with this arrow or open it here in your Canvas. Here are the references to laws pertaining to education. We talked about some of these. This is from the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And review this for your edification. And this is part of what we covered in the PowerPoint, so I'm not going to repeat it, but go through here and read these questions and answers to be familiar with translation and interpretation in education. Go through these. You have some other resources here. Just peruse these. Look at any Spanish equivalents, Spanish translations done by these organizations and departments so that you can have the proper terminology. Here are other glossaries. This is the Spanish side of the U.S. Department of Education, the English Learner Roadmap, Colorín Colorado. This is a national multimedia project that offers a wealth of bilingual, research-based information, activities, and advice for educators and families of English language learners, ELLs. And then another site right here with recommended sites, sitios recomendados. The video lecture is going to be here. Here are the resources. I want you to watch this video on the difference between an IEP, Individualized Education Plan or Program, it's both, and what is a 504 plan. If you're planning to work at a school district as a translator or interpreter, more than likely you're going to be interpreting for 504 plan meetings or IEP meetings. So it behooves you to know the difference here. And this website gives you the differences in an outline form. So watch the video, visit this website. It's a short website for you to check out. This is what we saw in the PowerPoint. This is a list of disabilities who qualifies for an individualized education program. So the program itself is an IEP. Once they go through the meeting and then you come up with goals, etc., as part of one of your assignments coming up. Once you have that put together, that is the plan. Also a P in Individualized Education Plan. So IEP may refer to either the plan itself that the teachers and everybody else, the team, is going to follow to support the student, or the program itself. So these are regulations, federal and state, that establish eligibility criteria for students ages 3 to 22 that seek special education services. So they have to assess the student, and some of the qualifying areas of impairment are students who are hearing impaired, hearing and visually impaired, speech or language impairment, visually impaired, severe orthopedic impairment. So movement is restricted, limited in strength, vitality, or alertness due to chronic or acute health problems or other health impairments, autism, intellectual disability, serious emotional disturbance, learning disability, multiple disabilities, and traumatic brain injury. So these are some of the qualifying areas of impairment. I want you to listen to this podcast from the American Translators Association with Natalia Abarca, who is with the Orange County Department of Education, and she has been instrumental in bringing change to translation and interpretation in education in Orange County first and beyond on a greater scale. And then after this, we'll have the discussion based on this and the article that is attached. To make sure that students' and parents' rights are protected, you have what is called IEP procedural safeguards, and they are presented in Spanish and English. Read through these so you're familiar with these and you know how to present them if and when they come up for you. So notice of procedural safeguards, aviso de garantías procesales. There might be slightly different names throughout as long as it means the same thing. So skim through it. It's a 14-page document in Spanish and English. So go through here so that you understand what this means, but also to note any vocabulary that you need to develop. If you look at some of these words and you may understand the English, you know what it means, but you don't know the Spanish word, then compare the two. As I mentioned earlier, that's a great way to improve your vocabulary, going through documents like these that are professionally translated, going through properly translated official websites that have an English and Spanish component. That way you can develop your vocabulary specifically in the educational field, but in other areas that you're interested in interpreting or translating as well. This is what I mentioned in the PowerPoint, the Riverside County IEP Manual. This is for your review. Don't read the whole thing, it's 142 pages. But interpreting and translating in the educational system, you want to be familiar with IEP terminology, special education terminology, and you can go through here so you're familiar with some of the terminology. What are the purposes of the Individualized Education Plan, IEP, the members of the team, the contents of the plan itself, the procedural safeguards, timeline requirements. You can get familiarized with the process by skimming through this. If you're not planning on going in educational interpretation, just briefly skim it so you're familiar with that, because many of the areas you're going to encounter will have something similar. So this is a good resource for you to check out as a reference. Now here is what happens when you Google Translate IEP forms or anything else. These forms were translated into Spanish and other languages by a company called SpedTrack that offers nationwide services to school districts. These forms are from Missouri. This is not something that we use for sure, as you'll see. And the company has a disclaimer that indicates that these forms are Google translated and they are not checked for accuracy, and that is saying a lot. So that's a disclaimer that they have, so do not rely on the translation. As the sample, como dice el dicho, para muestra un botón, look at the English. Okay, Missouri School District, the Individualized Education Program 4, name, first, Marcia. Middle, nothing. Last, Brady. Alright, simple enough, right? What did Google do? El programa de educación individualizada para, okay, so far so good. Nombre, primero nombre, right? Marcia, good. Medio, nada, okay. Último, is that how you say last name? Right? You don't. Apellido, not último. So don't do that. Then we already have factual problems here. Current address 1345 Church Street. Guess what Google did? Dirección actual 1345 Iglesia Street. That's the wrong address. Go look for Iglesia Street in Missouri. You're not going to find it. So this is one of the perils of using Google Translate. It's not going to take context into account, etc. Then go through here and look for any other things that stand out to you. And that is just a sample of why you don't want to use Google Translate. We have other glossaries in this page, Special Education and OC glossaries. This is the one you want to pay attention to that we're going to be using for the next assignment. Orange County Department of Education glossary. This is the one that I and other colleagues work on. So this is alphabetical, A through Z, and you can skim through it and look at the term translation, abbreviation, abreviatura, abreviación, go through absent on leave, ausencia con permiso, ausencia autorizada. So skim through here. If you have anything that you're looking for right now, look it up as far as educational terms. Otherwise, just keep this as a reference. And at the bottom here, we have some of the participating professionals, contributors, and that's yours truly from Santa Ana Unified School District, as well as other colleagues and everybody else who was part of this. These are all the languages, I believe, not just the Spanish. So this is the Educational Consortium of the Orange County Department of Education. So you have people from all different languages that worked on the glossary in the different languages. So this is the glossary you're going to be using for homework 4. You want to be able to provide the Spanish or English word for these terms. Do not use the internet, do not use Google. The word that you have to provide needs to be in this glossary. So what is an IEP? What is occupational therapy? What is the term other health impaired? Paraprofessional, percentile, PBIS. So go through here in this glossary, find this in the glossary for homework number 4, which is open right here. Again, yours is going to be different because I'm recording this before this is published. In this assignment, you're going to practice translating IEP terms by working with a special education glossary that I referenced just a moment ago. The glossary link is below, so you can use this one or the one on the last page. It's up to you. You have 10 write-in translations. Each is 20 points for 200 points total, and this is due by Sunday. The class exercise is here. You're going to practice consecutive interpreting, the parts in bold at the bottom. You're going to use the special education glossary and educational glossaries that are posted in the module and above module 1. For this, if you do not find the terms in those, you may use other online resources. So you're going to interpret after the text in bold and italics below, and after you are done interpreting, you're not going to upload your interpretation. You do not have to record yourself. What you are going to submit in a Word document is the answer to these 2 questions. What words did you have to search for the Spanish translation in order to interpret? So which words did you not know? If it's all of them, great, you're learning. If you know most of them, congratulations, you're getting there. How long did it take for you to interpret? You're going to listen to this recording that has the phrases here, and you are going to interpret. After you listen to a section, up to here for example, pause, and then do consecutive interpretation. If you don't know some of the words here, then note what words you didn't know. Then continue playing. Do you authorize and approve the IEP? It might be phrased a little bit differently in the recording. Go by the recording, not exactly what is here. So interpret the recording. Number 2, as a means of improving services and results for your child, did the school facilitate your involvement? How would you say that? Pause and interpret. Number 3, how do you say meeting is adjourned? But listen to how Professor de la Torre says it in this recording. So interpret this. Then they're going to talk about goals. Interpret this from the recording. Interpret this again from the recording and listen to the recording, but this is essentially what it says. If it's different from the recording, interpret the recording. After you're done with that, answer these questions and then turn in your assignment in that Word document. For your discussion, you're going to read this story from the American Translators Association, and then here as an excerpt to answer question 4. And after you are done reading the post and the above information, what you're going to write is the answer to these 5 items. So number your responses accordingly. So write number 1, answer this question. Number 2, name 2 challenges mentioned by Natalia Abarca and Catherine Allen. Number 3, so number your answers. And remember that you must post before seeing your classmates' posts. You might think you're the first one to post and wait. Do not wait. You are not going to see your classmates' posts for you to respond until you post your own first. And in this module, we have the quiz for modules 1 through 3. Be sure to review the study guide before you take the quiz. You can have it open as well. It's an open resource quiz. And some of you are taking both this class and BA 130. Some of the questions are very similar to your first quiz in that class because we're covering the same basic concepts. 20 questions, 20 points each, 400 points. You have 2 attempts, and it's due by Sunday. And this is a summary of what you will have learned. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an awesome week.